Welcome to Life Stories Network. I want you to sit back and listen closely because what I'm about to share might remind you of a moment when someone underestimated you, or even worse, laughed at you when you were down. This is my story, the one that still echoes in my head, not because it broke me, but because it built me into the person I never thought I could become. I grew up in a house where silence was rare. My parents weren't cruel, but they had a sharp way of looking at things. Success was measured in grades, achievements, and the weight of other people's praise. I was the quiet one, the one who preferred books and dreams over loud conversations. My sister, on the other hand, was the golden child. She was smart, pretty, and quick with words. It seemed like every good quality skipped me and landed on her. People adored her. My parents were proud of her, and I was just there. I remember one evening when everything started. We were sitting around the dinner table. My sister had just announced that she was engaged. The sparkle in her eyes and the diamond on her finger lit up the whole room. My parents clapped and cheered as though they had just won a medal. She told us about her fiancé, how he was smart, successful, and already on his way to becoming a millionaire. My parents leaned in, their smiles wide, their voices filled with excitement. For once, the dinner table wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with pride, joy, and laughter, but none of it was directed toward me. That's when my sister turned to me. With her sharp tongue and a smirk, she said, "Well, at least one of us didn't turn out to be a failure." The room fell quiet for a second. Then my parents chuckled, trying to soften the blow, but it was too late. Her words cut me like a knife, and the laughter that followed, that was the salt on the wound. My heart sank. I wanted to disappear. I looked at my plate, pretending not to care, but inside I was crumbling. I told myself I shouldn't let it bother me, but how could it not? When your own family laughs at you, it's like the ground under your feet gives way. I spent that night in my room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every choice I'd made. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a failure. I had no job worth bragging about, no relationship to show off, and no big achievements to claim. I was just existing, and in that house, existing wasn't enough. Days turned into weeks, and the wedding day finally came. My sister looked beautiful in her gown, radiant as ever, while I stood in the background, trying not to be noticed. I knew this was her day, her stage, her moment to shine. I was okay with that, but what I didn't expect was what her new husband would do that very night. When the ceremony was over and the music played, I was sitting at a corner table, sipping on water, trying to avoid awkward conversations. That's when he came over, her husband, the man everyone was praising. He looked at me with a kind smile and said, "Can I sit?" I nodded, unsure why he wanted to talk to me. He leaned in and said, "I've heard a lot about you. Not the best things, to be honest, but you don't look like a failure to me." My throat tightened. No one had ever said that to me, not in that way, not with such certainty. I managed to whisper, "They're not wrong." He shook his head. "They're wrong because they're only looking at what you don't have, not at what you're capable of." His words startled me. I had spent so long listening to the laughter, the whispers, the criticism, that I forgot someone could see me differently. He told me about his own life, how people had called him useless, lazy, and even hopeless. How he failed in school, struggled to find work, and was labeled a disappointment. But he didn't stop. He kept learning, kept trying, and built his own business from scratch. Now he was sitting here, a millionaire, not because life was easy, but because he didn't let others define his worth. As he spoke, I felt something stir inside me, a small flame, a spark of belief that maybe I wasn't doomed. Maybe there was something inside me worth fighting for. He said, "You're not a failure. You're just a story still being written. Don't let them close your book before you've even started the good chapters." That night changed everything for me. I walked away from the wedding with more than just memories of my sister's big day. I walked away with a new perspective, a seed planted in my heart. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't invisible, maybe I wasn't worthless, maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. The days after the wedding felt strangely different. I kept replaying his words in my head, like a song I couldn't shake off. "You're not a failure. You're just a story still being written." It hit me harder than anything my parents or sister had ever said. It was as if someone had finally handed me a mirror, not the cracked one I'd been using all my life, but a clear one that showed possibilities I never dared to believe in. Still, the voice of doubt clung to me. Every time I tried to imagine a better version of myself, the laughter of my family echoed louder. It was like standing in two worlds, one where I was nothing more than a disappointment, and another where maybe, just maybe, I could become something more. That tension gnawed at me, but it also kept me awake at night, thinking, wondering, questioning. A week later, my sister invited me to her new house for dinner. I almost didn't go, but I didn't want to give them more reasons to talk behind my back. When I arrived, her husband greeted me at the door with the same warmth he showed me at the wedding. It felt odd, being treated with kindness when I was so used to criticism. The dinner was filled with the usual chatter, my parents praising every little thing my sister did. But in between those moments, her husband turned to me and asked, "So, what do you want to do with your life?" No one had asked me that before, not like that. My parents always asked, "When will you get a job?" or "When will you settle down?" But no one had ever asked me what I actually wanted. I froze, staring at my plate, unsure how to answer. After a long pause, I whispered, "I don't know." He smiled gently and said, "That's okay, most people don't. The important thing is to start somewhere." That night, after dinner, he pulled me aside and handed me a book. It was about entrepreneurship, filled with stories of people who built something out of nothing. "Read this," he said, "not because I think you should start a business, but because I want you to see that failure isn't permanent. It's just part of the process." His words carried a weight that lingered even after I left. For weeks, I carried that book everywhere. I read it on the bus, during lunch breaks, and late into the night. Each story cracked open a window in my mind, letting in light I hadn't seen in years. I started to notice ideas bubbling up, small sparks of curiosity I had ignored before. I wasn't sure what to do with them, but for once I didn't shut them down. One afternoon, I sat in a coffee shop with the book in front of me. A stranger at the next table glanced over and said, "That's a good one. Changed my life." We started talking. He told me he ran a small business online, selling handmade products. His story was simple, but it hit me. He wasn't a millionaire, but he was independent, proud, and building something of his own. I went home that day buzzing with ideas. I began researching everything I could about online businesses, digital marketing, and freelancing. I didn't have money to invest, but I had time, and for the first time I had the will. I started small, offering my skills online. At first, it was clumsy. I made mistakes. Clients didn't always respond. Some jobs paid barely enough to cover my coffee, but every small win gave me confidence. Every kind review felt like a voice whispering, "See, you're not a failure." Of course, my parents weren't impressed. When they saw me glued to my laptop, they scoffed, "Still wasting your time." My mother said one evening. My father shook his head, muttering, "When will you grow up?" And my sister, with her sharp smile, added, "Maybe try something real for once." Their words stung, but this time I didn't let them bury me. I remembered what her husband told me. They're only looking at what you don't have, not at what you're capable of. Months passed, and slowly, things began to shift. My small projects turned into steady work. I started making money, not a fortune, but enough to stand on my own feet. For the first time, I wasn't asking anyone for help. That independence felt like oxygen. Every time I sent money for rent or paid my own bills, I felt a piece of the label failure fall off my shoulders. One evening, while visiting my sister's house, she made another comment in front of my parents. "You're still playing on the computer, huh?" She laughed. My parents chuckled, just like before, but this time her husband didn't stay quiet. He looked at her sharply and said, "Do you even know what he's been doing? He's building something. He's putting in the work, and I respect that more than sitting around bragging about someone else's money." The room went silent. My sister's smile froze, and my parents looked shocked. For once, someone had defended me, not out of pity, but out of respect. My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Driving home that night, I couldn't stop replaying his words. Respect, that was something I'd never thought I deserved, but now it was within reach, and maybe, just maybe, I was closer to rewriting the story everyone else had written for me. The months that followed became the most challenging and rewarding of my life. I was still learning, still stumbling, but every step forward felt like proof that I wasn't the person my family thought I was. I stayed up late at night, working on projects, teaching myself skills, and pushing through doubts. The glow of the laptop became my only light, but it didn't matter. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was chasing progress. Slowly, the results began to show. My little freelance gigs turned into long-term contracts. Clients began recommending me to others. My income grew, and so did my confidence. I wasn't rich, not yet, but I was no longer dependent on anyone. I was proud of myself for the first time in years. Every dollar I earned felt like a quiet answer to the laughter that once crushed me. Then came the day everything changed. My sister and her husband invited the whole family over for a dinner party. Their house sparkled with luxury, the kind my parents adored. My sister wore expensive clothes, showing off her wealth like a trophy. I expected the usual routine, her bragging, my parents nodding in approval, and me shrinking in the background, but that evening took a different turn. After dinner, her husband raised his glass and said, "I want to make a toast." Everyone leaned in. He looked directly at me and said, "Tonight, I want to honor someone who doesn't get enough credit. Someone who's been working quietly, proving that resilience matters more than labels. To him, failure isn't a destination. It's a step, and I'm proud to call him my brother." The room froze. My sister's smile vanished, and my parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I felt heat rise to my face, my throat tightening with emotion. No one had ever spoken about me like that, not in front of my family, not with such conviction. He continued, "We call people failures too quickly, but failure is only real when you stop trying, and from what I've seen, he hasn't stopped. He's building a future, and I respect that deeply." Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I managed to raise my glass, whispering a shaky thank you. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't painful, it was powerful. For the first time, my parents didn't laugh. They didn't mock. They didn't say a word. Maybe they were ashamed, or maybe they were just realizing how wrong they'd been. Either way, the weight on my chest lifted. That night, when I left their house, I felt a shift. I wasn't walking out as the shadow of my sister anymore. I was walking out as someone who had finally earned respect, not just from others, but from myself, and that mattered more than anything. From then on, I stopped living to prove my family wrong. I started living to prove myself right. I invested more time into my work, grew my skills, and slowly expanded my reach. My sister continued her life of wealth and glamour, but I stopped comparing myself to her. We were walking two different roads, and that was okay. My road was harder, but it was mine. Over the years, my projects turned into a small business. I hired people, built a team, and eventually launched something I could call my own. It wasn't instant success, but it was real, and every milestone reminded me of that night at the wedding, when her husband looked me in the eye and said, "You're just a story still being written." He was right. My story wasn't over when they laughed at me. It was only just beginning. The last time my parents visited me, they walked into my office. They looked around at the computers, the employees, the steady hum of work filling the space. My father cleared his throat and said almost awkwardly, "You've done well." My mother nodded, her eyes avoiding mine, but I caught the hint of a smile. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, and for me, that was enough. My sister, still proud and sharp as ever, didn't say much, but her husband gave me a knowing smile, one that reminded me of the night he first stood up for me. Without him, I might have kept believing the lies I told myself. Without his words, I might have stayed in the shadows. Sometimes, it only takes one person to change the way you see yourself, and once you see yourself differently, the world can't hold you back the same way again. Looking back now, I realize that being called a failure was never the real problem. The problem was believing it. The laughter, the labels, the comparisons, they were only powerful because I accepted them. The moment I stopped, the moment I decided to keep going despite the noise, everything changed. So if you've ever been laughed at, if your family or friends have made you feel small, I want you to remember this. Their opinion isn't your truth. Your story is still being written, and no matter how many times you stumble, as long as you keep writing, you are not a failure. That is the lesson I carry with me. Not bitterness, not anger, but strength. The strength to stand tall even when no one believes in you. The strength to keep moving even when the road feels endless. And the strength to remind myself, every single day, that my story is far from over,